Next up, we're going to talk just a little bit about directives. As you're most likely aware, there are three types of directives: components, attribute directives, and structural directives. If you're not aware of components being directives, well, they are. They're just directives with a template, which is kind of cool if you think about it. We already touched on components, and we'll do so much more throughout the course, so there's really no need to cover them now. I'm assuming you're already familiar with the standard structural directives in Angular, ngIf, ngFor, ngSwitch, and there's really only a few other UI-related things that we're going to cover later in the course. So for now, we can cross those off too. That leaves attribute directives, which is what we're going to talk about next. In a nutshell, this is what an attribute directive does. But this simple statement can be deceptive. Why would we want to change the appearance or behavior of a DOM element via a directive? We'll look at a specific use case in a moment and more throughout the course, but first here are a couple of general thoughts. These are all variations on a theme, but I think they help. Directives can make your HTML more dynamic. In one application, I have a scenario where users may or may not have access to certain parts of the application, depending on which license they purchased. A directive allows me to easily alter the DOM for this. Now, I use a router guard to actually keep them out of the areas they haven't paid for, but the directive allows me to put something in the UI that tells them there's a paywall before that functionality. The goal of most applications is to present the UI the user wants or needs, and that may change from run to run. Directives allow us to respond to environment changes. Using the same scenario as above, if the user enters a valid license key in the middle of a session, the directive is no longer going to modify the DOM to indicate the paywall. But I didn't have to change anything in the code. I just had the directive there. It just doesn't apply anymore. And last but not least, directives are just so darn easy. Litter the attribute directive across your UI wherever you need it, and the logic for it is all centralized in one place. In that same application as above, the directive could be on a dozen or more elements on a page. Adding a directive was easy, and I don't need to think about where all of that logic is. It's all together in one place, the directive. So those are some general thoughts about the usefulness of directives. Let's go take a look at how the use case I mentioned is actually implemented. Hopefully this will spur you to think of your own cases for custom attribute directives. Taking a look at a quick little demo to show directives updating our UI, we'll load our last widget here, and you can see it's essentially an adaptation of a paywall directive that I have for a product that I've built. And what it's doing is looking to compare a user's current license to a required license for a certain piece of functionality. If they don't have the appropriate license, then it throws this little indicator off to the right, and it says it requires additional license purchase. Now, I have this set up here just for simplicity's sake. Everything is randomly generated, so every time I load this, the directive displays next to different pieces. But the idea is that it's checking some condition and then updating the UI. And I can put this directive, in fact, I did put this directive all throughout my application to check licensing. As I said in the slides, I actually control access or restrict access with route guards, but this gives a nice visual indicator to the user that, hey, you're not going to be able to get here. Taking a look at the code for this, pretty straightforward. A simple unordered list of links. We use our HS paywall directive. And another important thing to note there is that we do prefix that with some unique set of characters so that it's not just paywall. That avoids any potential conflicts if I'm using third-party libraries or anything like that. We pass in the required license, which is just a property of the individual item, and display the title, all as part of a link. Inside the widget component, I'm generating a list of links and randomly assigning a license level to them between 1 and 3. That information gets passed into my paywall directive via an input property. Don't worry about the details here. We haven't talked about some of the details like renderer2 and element refs. I really just wanted to put this in front of you and show the purpose behind directives, updating the UI, in this case, based on certain conditions. You could have directives that update the UI in every case, anytime it's used. But here I'm applying a condition. Specifically in my check link function, I'm checking if the required license for a particular element is greater than the current license the user has, which is stored in a configuration service. Then I'm going to put that little dollar sign next to the link.